Hi there. Today we're going to do lesson 3.2 called The 7 Years' War or the French and Indian War. So our objective that we'll be thinking about as we go through this lesson is to explain both the causes and the effects of the 7 Years' War, or as it's known in American history, the French and Indian War. So let's begin and talk about the competition that existed between Britain and France at this time. Both of these were powerful European countries, and they were seeking really global domination. They wanted to create empires that connected Europe, the Americas, even into Africa and the Pacific for their own military and economic gain. And each saw each other as a major rival. That competition is going to emerge in the United States as the French and Indian War, whereas French settlers from New France and English settlers from the British colonies are going to conflict. Globally, it's part of the French and Indian War is a small part of a much larger conflict between Britain and France called the 7 Years' War, which took place in Europe and Africa and some parts in the Middle East. So our little corner of it is one part of a much larger conflict between these two global nations. So the French and Indian War is going to start in a part of North America called the Ohio River Valley. And the Ohio River Valley is just south of the Great Lakes, and it is east of the Mississippi River and west of the Appalachian Mountains. In essence, it's sort of out where Pittsburgh is now, which is at the very, very fringe of the English colonies. And the Ohio River Valley was claimed by France. They said it was part of their territory, as well as the English. And for the English, there was a much more immediate need for settlement in the Ohio River Valley. The English colonies were facing two very important problems. In the northern part of the colonies, where the major cities were, the population was increasing so rapidly in those areas that the cities could no longer contain it. So the northern colonies were sort of becoming suffocated under too much people because of their economic success. In the South, economic success also played a factor in the need for westward settlement because there was less and less new land available to planters and to small farmers. It had all been sort of gobbled up and claimed. So if the southern colonies were going to grow and expand economically, they needed new lands, which were going to be in the West. So for the English, the desire to move westward into their territory was essential for the growth and survival of the colonial economy. So when settlers begin to move into the Ohio River Valley, which was very sparsely populated by the French, they just had a couple military forts there, and that was it. Conflict ignited between the two nations because the French said this was an intrusion in French territory. The English say the French had no business being in that territory. Nobody really had the answers, except, of course, for the natives who didn't understand what all this fighting was about. But when the French forcibly pushed the English out of the Ohio River Valley at gunpoint, that ignited the conflict, which would become part of the 7 Years' War, or the French and Indian War in the colonies today. We call it the French and Indian War, or at least the British did, not because the French and Indians were necessarily fighting each other. It's because native nations aligned with both sides. There were native nations on the side of the French. There were native nations on the side of the English. Really, what the native people said was, which side is going to benefit us more if they win? Which side is going to have our lands protected, our lifestyles, our culture protected from white incursion if the settlement occurs? So from an English perspective, it's the French and Indian War, but natives aligned with both sides in the conflict. Okay, so when the war breaks out, we're not going to go through all the details and ins and outs of the French and Indian War. That's for a class in military history. But what we are going to note is that England won. pretty heartily defeated the French up in New France, causing the French to surrender all of their territory in North America. So Britain acquired by treaty the Ohio River Valley, pretty much all land between the Mississippi River and the Appalachian Mountains. That eastern portion of the French Empire was now British, as well as all of New France, or what we would call Canada today. That's why there's portions of Canada that still speak French. It goes all the way back to this time period. French territory west of the Mississippi River, which they called the Louisiana Territory, they were sneaky, and they gave it to the Spanish right before the end of the war. So when they went to sign the peace treaty, the French go, oh, that's not ours, that's Spain. And they did that intentionally to keep it out of the hands of the British. So when the war was over, the British treasury back home in England was really depleted, because keep in mind, 7 Years' War was America, Europe, Africa, Middle East. It was a world war. Britain won, but they pretty much broke the bank when they won. So new taxes were required to help cover the cost of the war. Those taxes were levied in England, and the English people anticipated that would happen, but they were also levied in the colonies, and that came after a long period of the British government sort of ignoring the colonies again. Remember, they paid attention, they didn't pay attention. So there'd been a long period of not paying attention, and then all of a sudden these new colonies, or new taxes, were imposed on the colonies to help pay for a war which the colonists, in all truth, helped to start. However, the colonial people did not receive these taxes well. It had been a while since they had been directly taxed by Britain, and now, thanks to the Enlightenment, there was a lot of question about Britain's right to tax, and especially what chafed the colonists, what got their fire up, was the colonial legislatures did not impose these taxes. Their friends and neighbors were not taxing them. It was taxes approved in London Parliament all the way across the Atlantic. They didn't like that in the colonies. They also didn't like the fact that Britain increased the number of soldiers in the colonies. So when the tax collectors who worked for the king were going around collecting these new taxes, the soldiers were there as the muscle and the enforcement to make sure that people were paying these taxes. Britain was not going to let the colonists shirk their responsibilities. So that increase in a British military presence, along with the new taxation, did not sit well with the colonists. So with the conclusion of the war, the English are very excited to move westward into their newly won territory. And a lot of the settlers came from the very edge, the frontier of the existing English colonies. And if you remember from period 2, that generally tended to be your poorer settlers, your settlers who were newly immigrated to the colonies, the people that kind of had to live a backwards, rough and tumble frontier life. They're like, ooh, we can move west, we can form settlements, we can have big plots of land, we can make some money. Native people, however, had different ideas. Native people expected to maintain the same type of relationship they had with the French, which was, we will trade you commodities, we will be great trading partners, but you don't establish permanent settlements. However, the English were very much about establishing permanent settlements. That's what they had done up and down the East Coast, and that led to a lot of conflict with native nations. Metacom's War from period 2, as the English gobbled up more and more lands that belonged to the natives. So that conflict between natives and English colonists in the West now emerges again. And we see fresh fighting between these two sides as natives are trying to stop white settlement, white taking of their lands, white assimilation into their culture, and defend their lifestyles. So the colonists look to the British government and say, woo, hey, these soldiers you got here, send them out and help us. You need to help us defeat these natives who are killing Englishmen on English soil. However, the British government refuses to take action on these conflicts in the Ohio River Valley. One, they don't want to fight another war so quickly after finishing a war with France. And two, to be honest, they can't afford another big scale conflict, which they're afraid that would emerge. So Britain backs away from that, which really disappoints and angers the colonists. What further angers them is that Parliament, with no colonial representation in it, passes a law called the Proclamation of 1763. And that draws a line down the back of the English colonies. It's called the Proclamation Line, and it runs roughly down the Appalachian Mountains. And that line is there, and what Britain says is anything west of the line, which is the new Ohio River Territory they fought the French for and won, was for native people only, no white settlement. The white side of the line, the English side of the line, was east of the Appalachian Mountains, which was the original 13 colonies, which, don't forget, were overcrowded and running out of land. So the Proclamation of 1763 sort of turned the clock back to what things looked like before the war was even fought. So the impact of the proclamation on the American colonies was significant. One, there was greater colonial unity developed after the war. The colonists, for the first time during the French and Indian War, fought as one unified colonial military force. They were organized together, and colonists from different colonies were mixed together in the military regiments. It wasn't like the militias of one colony were fighting, and then down south, the militias of another colony were fighting. So we see colonists get to know people from the other regions of the colonies. We also see increased communication between colonial leaders and colonial governments as they map out strategy and execute military maneuvers. So it brings the colonies together. And the Proclamation Line furthers that colonial unity because it does run down all 13 colonies. Both northern overcrowded colonies and landless southern colonies are feeling the pinch, the same pinch of British action. The second impact of it is it creates more resentment towards Britain. All of those English people who supported the war financially are with their lives in fighting the war with the expectation that when they won, they would be able to move into this new land, which would create new opportunities, especially, keep this in mind, for lower income, newly immigrated colonists. They were the ones on the front line. They were the ones that were eager to move into the Ohio River Valley. So when Britain closed it off to them, they said, what did we fight the war for? Why did my father, my son, my brother, my husband die in this conflict if we're not going to get any of the benefits to it? So that resentment towards Britain grew out of the Proclamation Line. And that's where we're going to leave it today. Just a reminder of our objective is that we need to explain both the causes of the French and Indian War, which is that westward migration and demand for westward movement, as well as the effects, increased conflicts with natives and resentment that grows over the proclamation line and all the problems that causes. We'll see this pick up again in the next lesson, where we're going to see the progress of colonial resentment towards Britain grow along with that growth of colonial unity. Thanks, guys. Have a great day.